Right, greetings from the Dark Continent, Conscious Caracal here, or Adams Fun Sale. And tonight I welcome back a guest that's been on the channel many times, and I've also featured on his channel, Roman Cabanac. Most of you will know him from Morning Shot. I know there's a lot of overlap between our audiences, but if you don't know him, he does social and political and cultural commentary, specifically focusing on South Africa. He's been a content creator for years, creating specifically content for the South African space. And I think if you're interested in South Africa, whether that be news events analysis or just in general analysis about what ails South Africa and what the solutions are, all those types of topics are covered on his channel. So welcome back on the show, Roman. Good to have you.
Adams, thank you so much for having me back, especially on this auspicious occasion of Stage 6 blackouts. It's the topic of the show today is quite relevant in this context.
Yeah. Well, let's start off maybe just with the context for your bias towards the countryside, and that is, I mean, I grew up in the countryside. I grew up in a small town in the Western Cape called Malmesbury. I think a lot of my listeners know of it. I mean, it's not that small a town anymore, but it's still a countryside environment and a farming community. And yeah, I mean, that was 18 years of my life. And I think if I understand correctly, you were also born, you also have a lot of your childhood in the countryside, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that's right. So I grew up south of Johannesburg on a small holding, but we were integrated into like a bigger farm. Like there was 600 hectares or 800 hectares. So my childhood is one of sort of farm living. We didn't farm, we didn't make money from the farm, so to speak, but we had like, animals and game auctions and culling and getting to know our neighbors and understanding what the radio was and how it works, patrolling, all of those things was sort of part of my childhood. So yeah, and it's something that I really cherish as a childhood, and one hopefully that I can give to my children in a very short amount of time.
Hmm. Yeah, and I can definitely say from my experience that that type of background, growing up in that environment, definitely shaped a lot of my views, shaped a lot of the ways I see the world, the ways I approach people, the ways I approach community. There's definitely a very strong divide, even in our modern age, between the countryside and the urban side of living, and often there even appears to be an antagonism, whether that be an organic antagonism or a manufactured antagonism. There's always this to and fro, and this is not something that's unique to modern times. I mean, back in the day, thousands of years ago, people were already talking about the tension between the city and the countryside and the small town, the small village. And I mean, someone that spoke or wrote a lot about it was definitely Spengler. He wrote about the tension between the countryside and the increasingly urbanized centers, and especially in South Africa. I mean, our country is a country where the vast majority of people lived for the majority of the country's history, lived in a rural environment, lived in the countryside, and now we're a rapidly urbanizing country. I mean, I think we're one of the fastest urbanizing countries in the world. And I saw a stat the other day that's actually quite staggering. It's that something like 60% of the population live in like the 5 or 6 top like metro areas in the country. I'm probably butchering those statistics, but it's something staggering, and it's only increasing. People are leaving the countryside in mass. But just to finish that point, if you were to look at your social media posts, if you were to look at what you're talking about, you seem to be itching to go back, and you can't wait to leave the city. And every time you visit the countryside, you appear to return enchanted. Is that correct?
That's right. Return with a V. Return. So I've taken a few trips the past few weeks, mostly to the Free State, and then excuse me, then to the Eastern Cape, then to the Western Cape, specifically to look at rural towns as a place to raise my family in time to come. God willing, my wife will become a sort of remote worker as well in time to come, same as I am, and then we can really live everywhere, anywhere we wish. And the dream for me, not so much for the missus, is a small rural town in the middle of Eastern Cape or the Western Cape. Probably the Western Cape, just based on the few contextual factors that don't matter too much over here. But what I can tell you, and my sincere belief is that the future of South Africa is going to be these resilient, anti-fragile towns
Mm,
that has a community, that has a sense of order, that has a sense of emergent order, most importantly, and a town that can really defend itself against the ravages of a rapidly declining South Africa for the most part. And I think with modern technology, that can be done much easier than ever before. And therefore, the hunt is on to find that sort of town. There are a few parameters, though. It can't be too big. Obviously, it can't be too small. But it has to have a community already that we can plug into. And it needs to have some form of existing infrastructure and existing social structure that makes it easy for people like me to plug into it. There's nothing worse than some city yuppie going to a town and then beautifying it and gentrifying
mm,
it, and then it's just a nightmare. You have to fit in, not the other way around.
mm. Yeah, and I mean, this is a point that our friend Russell Lamberti has made many times, where those little towns that everyone finds so appealing and so interesting, or play appealing to live in and want to go live, they're beautiful because people love those towns, because people have actually put time and effort and dedication into preserving their aesthetic character, to preserve their cultural and moral foundations, even I would say, and to preserve the community. That what you're viewing there in these towns that you love so much is generations of sacrifice and duty and responsibility. And now in our age of remote work, I think more than ever, people are just moving to these little towns to go live somewhere that's nice and has a nice postcard view. But unfortunately, many of these people that are flocking to these little towns have little appreciation or even understanding into what made these towns so great in the first place.
Yeah, we're obsessed with this like quality of life. It's like I want
Mm,
everything that modernity gives us, like checkers on a bike delivered to my door, but I don't want any of the inconveniences.
mm,
Whereas I don't mind the inconveniences. They form part of the culture. They form part of what makes it special to be there. So funny enough, if you find a town with, say, internet access that's not that great, it's probably a better town than one that has fiber, for example, because you can
mm,
still make your mark in the one with less viable internet than the one that already has it. Like, for example, most of the garden route now is completely inhabitable, not because it's terrible, but because Joe Burgers are moving there and making a Joe Burger once
mm,
again, without any
mm.
sense of trying to belong there. It's a sort of imposition of urban values to places that are not really urban for the most
Right.
part. It's a shame, but it's inevitable.
Mm, no, absolutely, and it's. I don't think it's a trend that's only restricted to South Africa. It's something we're seeing all over the world. But why I wanted to do this conversation, one of the reasons was there seems to be a move back to the countryside. There seems to be people that are leaving the cities, whereas the trend of the previous century and the early 21st century was to still go to the cities for opportunities, for work, for experiences, for entertainment, for hedonism. Now people seem to be have lost their appetite a little bit for the cities and seem to be moving away. I know so many people that are moving back to the countryside, but they will get into some of the challenges of that later. I think one of the cartoons actually that I saw recently that demonstrated that was this tree that's planted in the middle of a CBD, and the tree is like yeah, the air here smells like cigarettes, and the but at least the restaurants are nice. And that's the thing, is that's pretty much what's left of urban living, is that you have nice shopping malls and you have all these nice entertainment experiences, but you don't have quality of life in the genuine sense of good quality air that you're breathing, good quality nature that you can visit anytime you want, nice wide open space, not just people living on top of each other like sardines. There's a lot, and I think I was talking to one of my mates recently about population density. I'm convinced it makes people crazy. I'm convinced that population density just drives people insane, because wherever people congregate in large numbers on top of each other, all types of strange psychological stuff starts to come to the fore.
This is something I've been looking at recently. Excuse me, my voice is a bit The air's very dry and my voice goes a bit. But I follow a chap on Twitter called Simon Saris, Sarris. He's building a house in New Hampshire, and he's a tech guy, but he's never been someone who owns a new computer or anything like that. And he's building his house from scratch. Most of it is built, but he's building extensions now to it and things in the garden and things like that. And he had this wonderful tweet about people don't seem to realize that the city creates the anxiety that you're feeling. And I think that's true in some sense. I was on a farm over the weekend, which is in the middle of the Free State, so very, very far. And the farm owner and the farm manager were sort of having a discussion. But you just see two people equally, like in equal stature to each other, having a discussion, learning from each other. No tension, no anxiety, no jealousy, no envy. It's just two people debating about what the farm can do or what we can make better on the farm. And this is a sort of inverted hierarchy. So you normally got the boss and the manager, but here it's two people supposedly in this employment relationship, but they are
Right.
deep friends who want the best interests of the farm at hand. I don't know if that can happen on scale between your neighbors, between the people at your work, between even your church in a city. I don't think that can really happen. Where so everyone has a sort of common goal, and they're all deeply respectful of that goal, and they all deeply respect everyone else who wants to help them along with that common goal. I don't think that feeling is very scalable at all, especially in the city. To me, a city is essentially competitive. You're competing with everyone else for the same sort of resources, right? For the same Uber ride, you're competing for the salary, you're competing for the school, you're competing for absolutely everything. It's a rat race to the bottom of competition. Competition may be good in the market, but for human relationships, it's an awful metric to use. But unfortunately, that is the dominant one in a sort of urban environment.
No, I think a lot of elements of rural and countryside living can't be extrapolated to a large scale, to a city scale of millions of people. Some things are just inherently lost when you get to that type of scale. But at the same time, I do feel that there is a place for urban living, and there's a place for countryside living. Some people just don't like living in the countryside. Some people want to live in the city. But it seems like a lot of people are waking up to the fact that, yeah, the city isn't everything that it's cracked up to be. But at the same time, I don't think it's as easy as just moving when you want. But you have shared many of your experiences where you seem to go to visit the countryside all across South Africa very frequently. What are some of the things when you visit these countryside towns as someone that lives in the city most of the time? What strikes you every time, even though you've maybe seen every time you visit, you see the same thing? What every time is something that still stands out to you when you leave the city?
So we'll go with the downsides, especially for a South African context, just the decay, right? Just the utter decay of the roads you're driving on, the quality of the housing. If it's older than 50 years, it tends to be fine, but newer stuff is just awful. Every single town has some sort of township or settlement next to it, from which it derives labor, and also just the huge lack of economic activity within that town. I stayed over in Philip Willis in the Free State, in the world's best Airbnb. It was amazing, but there was sort of nothing else around it, I'm afraid. The church is still there, thankfully. There's a few little businesses and shops there, thankfully, but overall you can see it's a town that's in just a death spiral that's not going anywhere anytime soon. But on the other hand, excuse me, other than the decay, what is interesting is as soon as you drive in and you get out your car, there's this immediate sense of not relaxation, a lack of anxiety. People just seem really not content, that's the wrong word, but just at ease with the world for the most part. Excuse me. Back to Philip Willis, the lady who manages the Airbnb is this 73-year-old Scottish woman who's been in South Africa for 20 years and in Philip Willis for 12. And what she does is she manages Airbnbs all over the place. And I was thinking to myself, this woman, what the hell are you doing here? You can be in England living on a pension or something. And she
Right.
says, no, this is my home. I know everyone
Yeah.
here, absolutely everyone. I've got a British accent, but I can speak, I think, with Sutu. I think she speaks Sutu rather well. She makes her money, as with everyone else. So we had to park on the road, and I said, "Is at the city slicker? Is the road safe to park?" Yeah, nothing ever happens here, and it was just a sense of like just contentness with where you are
Mm,
in life. It's no like
mm.
I don't know, trying to overshadow you or trying to compete with you or nothing to that
I'm not
effect. It's
trying
just a
to
case of
create a corporate empire. I'm not trying to
yeah,
like
yeah, and it makes those people far more human with
mm,
a very low time preference, where people
mm,
adjust themselves to the context in which they arrive. They don't try to
mm,
dominate the
yeah.
context. I mean, some domination
Yeah.
sometimes is important, but
Mm,
not always. And they seem to
yeah.
understand it better than we do.
Yeah, and another big problem is the fact that many of the cultural heartlands of many of South Africa's communities are still in the rural areas. They're still in the countryside. So when many of these youth move to the cities for work opportunities, not many times, not even out of free will, sometimes they're forced to move to the cities for opportunities or to get education. But then they're surrounded by millions of other deracinated individuals that have also left their cultural roots, and they're not surrounded by any cultural touchstones or anything that really brings them back to their home in a metaphorical sense, but physically maybe even so. And then in the end, I think a lot of these individuals are just forced to become part of the deracinated grey goo of city urbanites that in the end almost feel like they get to a point where they start to despise the cultural side of South Africa. They start to despise tradition. They start to almost despise the countryside. And I don't think that's something that's unique to South Africa. You see it in the United States as well, where people
Yeah.
that have become too urbanized without not the countryside version of touch grass, almost like touch the yes. We need to think of a creative metaphor for basically saying you need to go out to the countryside, not for the nature, but specifically for the people in the small towns. But that version of it,
Exactly.
if they lose touch with the countryside, they almost become very cold and sometimes even resentful of it. They see it as backwards.
It is very backwards, especially now in American politics with like the Supreme Court overturning like Roe v. Wade, for example. And you see quite a
Mm,
lot of people saying, who are these like flyover red states, like these
mm.
hicks living in the countryside telling us what we can do? We are the, elite progressive
Yeah,
urbanites. We
the
should be able,
uneducated rabble.
yeah, we should be the ones that, dictate how fast progressivism increases in this country. So you see a lot of that sort of resentment and that elitism. Let's be honest, it's
Mm,
the elitism of urbanites that gets to me as well. I do see in the comments quickly, there's a Glenn in Amanzimtoti. He says Aberdeen in the Karoo. I went to Aberdeen in December
mm,
overnight. Once again, Airbnb is great for this, by the way. I think Airbnb is the technology that can reignite the rural economy. I'm not even lying. It's a great app,
mm.
and you find great places on there. We stayed over at a mansion that was built by a ostrich baron in 1882 or something like that. So
Yeah,
back in the day, Aberdeen and those surrounding areas were well known for ostriches, and ostrich feathers and ostrich eggs were a huge commodity in England. So they used to
yeah,
farm them and export everything back to,
and got filthy
well,
rich.
and they got filthy rich. So basically, what you got is this mansion, 6 bedrooms, wooden, inlaid tables,
Yeah,
pristine
I think
house.
yeah, barren is the right word.
Yeah. Well, they call the ostrich baron mansion, I think
Yeah.
it's called.
Mm,
But it was a wonderful place, truly spectacular. Staff on hand, whatever you want, swimming pool, whatever you want. But the town is just deplorable.
yeah, Afrikaans,
You
you'd
have
say the
about
town is moeg. It's tired.
well, you got about 20 of these houses, of these ostrich baron houses that are like Edwardian or Victorian in nature, in
Mm,
architecture. And half of them are just shuttered and closed and no one's living in them, right? This could
mm,
be I don't know, this town could be used as a film set, this town could be a tourist attraction. Like there's so much going for it, or there was so much going for it in terms of industry. But it's well worth your while if you do go past Aberdeen, like stay over in the Ostrich Baron Mansion. It's pretty nice. But yeah, to this day, you see people walking the dogs in the streets. You see all sorts of races going about their day, and the service you get at these little towns, whether it's from the petrol pump attendant, the shop, whatever you want, always happy, always smiling, always courteous.
And there's not this tension that's current that just hangs in the air constantly.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was very important during the COVID nonsense with the mask and all that sort of stuff. Over there,
yeah, no, I know a lot of oaks that live in small towns during the COVID pandemic, and they never saw a mask in their life. And I saw here, maybe to add to what you were saying there, Defrate to Watcher says, if you want to see, oh wait, no, there was another comment that it's this one, also by Defrate to Watcher. The main motivation to live in a rural area is that criminals are not anonymous, in that the way that they can move amongst people in the city. Knowing who the stranger is can be more important than knowing all your neighbors. Yeah, that absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. It's a high trust environment. Whereas
such an important point.
Yeah, whereas the urban centers are inherently a low trust environment. The more people, the more low trust it will become, and the more intimate and small the town is, the higher trust environment it is, because the social stakes are so high of being a criminal and antisocial.
It's such an important statement. I spoke to people in Jeffreys Bay, head of the community police forum. I spoke to a farmer in the Free State and someone else on this very topic about crime and things like that. And they all said, if there's a criminal act, we send out an SOS, and we send it out to everywhere. The city or the town itself, the settlement outside the town, and we work together to pinpoint exactly who it is, where they're found, etc., etc. And for the most part, what you do find in South Africa, which maybe people don't realize, is the poorer township area are the ones who are most upset about crime, because these people rely on the town for their income and their way of life. And if someone from that township causes problems or causes the crimes, they know the knock-on effects for the township are terrible. So the township CPF or the township security groups, more often than not, are the ones who manage to solve the issues in terms of finding out who it is, arresting them, arresting in air quotes, or letting people know exactly who the culprit is, or apprehending them. So that is something that you don't really would know about coming from an urban area where we rely on private security and things like this. But yeah, you can't rely on private security, or you can, but it's largely ineffective, especially if people from all races and classes actually do know each other, which is a great benefit.
Yeah.
You don't have to delegate it or contract it out to anywhere else.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing, is that even for business, if your business is cheating people in town, if you're like a butcher there and you're underweighing your meat, that word's going to come out. And when people find out, you're going to lose not only all your customers, but people are going to socially shun you. And because you're living in a small town, that means a lot of your friends and a lot of your family members are your customers. And when I don't think many people would cheat their family members, but I think there's many people that are greedy enough to cheat even their friends. And when those people or their acquaintances or people they are just friendly with, when those people find out, they're not going to be too pleased that you've been selling them 800 grams of mince, but you were claiming that it was a kg for years. And that's the thing. There are social consequences for it. And that's why in small towns, you don't need this massive law machine, this legislative leviathan that you have in massive states, where when there are millions of people living in one very strong quote unquote community, you need a strong state to legislate them all and make sure everyone behaves and that don't cheat each other and don't murder each other and they don't lie to each other or have false contracts. But in a small town, because it's almost like there's an unspoken, invisible law that everyone knows, and everyone just inherently knows that the social costs of me being immoral are so high that it's not worth it. not to say that that's the only thing that deters them. I think also if when you know the people around you morally, your conscience will not. I mean, most people's conscience will not allow them to just cheat the people that they've grown up with and the people that they have a very strong history with, or maybe even commit crimes against them. I think their conscience will stop them. But if their conscience is very weak, if they're just a very selfish person, I think they will still be hindered by the fact that there will be massive social consequences if they were to act immorally. So it is kind of the antidote to this massive state, this legislative leviathan. The antidote to it is small localized communities, because then you don't need it anymore. Because if you live in a big city, you need that leviathan. You can't have that type of law in your own hands in a big city. But in a small town, it's just the norm, and you don't need the state. You don't have to go begging the state to legislate you.
Yeah, in the rural community, the state is just a factor of living. It is not the dominant factor of living. I mean, I know farmers in the Free State who, voluntarily donate ammunition to the local SAPS, head office, because they don't have any. Because they know the station commander, they know the principal of the school, they know the head of the co-op, they know all their neighbors within 30 kilometers. I mean, what do you need I don't know, the private detective?
And if you steal someone's vehicle, that vehicle is going to be seen the next day in town.
It is, and very importantly, all the infrastructure of safety is actually built by the citizens,
right?
With the police's blessing, because they don't have the funds or whatever the case might be. So, I mean, funny enough, you can, in most rural areas, if you have a certain way about yourself, you can become like the lord of the area. Like you can become quite a dominant figure. No, it's quite romantic.
So that's why that's why you want to move to the countryside, so you can become the warlord of like a small little Karoo town called, like, I don't know, fucking Verlore Rivier.
I prefer the term protector, grand protector, warlord. Yeah, maybe not so much, but I do see Caleb in the comments saying like how much he or she, apologies, hates the country. Crime is very high in rural areas. It's much lower in rural areas for the most part. The thing is, South Africa is not a country, right? It's a fiction. As I explained in a video called South Africa Doesn't Exist as a Country. South Africa is a legal fiction. It's a fiction of empire, the British Empire mostly. It's a fiction where 12 different nations live within a state, but they have no sense of obligation to each other. They have no sense of what justice means. There's no universal sense of belonging to this state of South Africa. So the mindset of South Africa is not that we just need to wait and someone in Pretoria will solve our problems. John Steenhuisen will take over the union buildings and there you go, boom, our lives are ready. No, that is not the mindset. If you have that mindset, you won't survive here very long. If you have the mindset that it is chaotic and dangerous and there's load shedding and all that, all these things, in actual fact, are great. They're wonderful. They allow you to create the circumstances in which you wish to live. And that is only applicable once you find other people who tolerate you and that you can work with to do it in, right? Because life is not about going to work and then coming home and watching Netflix. Life is about going to work, coming home, and then working on your community and your family and all the rest of it. Life is a constant working struggle. And I use the term struggle loosely. But in the city, you come home and you relax. You cook and you watch Netflix and bullshit.
You need to charge your own personal battery so you can go to work tomorrow again, so you have energy to go to work.
So you have energy to stare at a screen in your cubicle for 8 hours, because that's the height of civilization, right? But in the rural area, every day is building, right? If you're a farmer, you keep building. If you come back to your farmhouse, you always keep building. You on the radio at 8 p.m., right? You are the person going on patrols. You're the ones that are strategizing about how to solve this or that issue on the farm or in the community. And that's what rural living is about. And that's
Yeah,
most
and over the
importantly,
weekends you take part in community socialization. You go to the pub, or you go to some type of community event, or you go to the
mhm.
SCO in Afrikaans. It would be the
Yeah, or you go to the Wilderfeest, which
mm,
was
mm,
down the road in the Eastern Cape. You go there, right? But in the rural, in the countryside, if you are someone who has a business or someone who does work in the countryside, every day is a day of building something or improving something or strategizing about something. It's not about relaxing versus working. It's a way of life to just not suffer the consequences of the elements, in other
mm,
words. And that's the mindset you need to have to thrive in South Africa,
mm.
generally, urban or rural.
Yeah. Well, it comes down to that old adage of idle hands are the devil's workshop. And I mean, that's whatever you are just sitting in idleness, your thoughts are just going to be, I think, miserable. You're not going to be when you're busy, you're working, you're doing what your body was made to do, and that's to be physically active, to be building, to be working, to be struggling, to be toiling. If I were to just be sitting on my hands all day doing nothing, it would be horrible. I can't imagine that type of life, and I would definitely not wish it on anyone. But some people think they just want to make enough money so they can sit at home and watch movies and do nothing all day, and it's just not appealing to me. That whole thing of struggling and working is what keeps you busy, is what keeps you happy. It's overcoming those obstacles where you get your big dopamine hits and where you get your satisfaction and your meaning from. I mean, just the other day, my girlfriend's bag that she takes on holiday has little wheels, and one of them broke off on the previous holiday. And then I would just sat there, and I had to work out a solution how to fix it because I didn't have the specific screw that they used, the manufacturer used. So I fashioned like a Jippo bootleg screw that looks like the original screw out of two parts, and then it worked. And just solving that problem was so satisfying and nice to do. And that applies to any type of little thing you do around the house as well. And when you're doing that
Yeah.
on a community level, that's pardon for the repetition, but then that's next level. Then you're really getting a lot of satisfaction out of life, because then you're participating in life the way you should be. You're a social being. We're not made to just sit alone and just be these idle individuals.
Yeah, and especially surrounded by people you don't know. So let me give you a good
Uh,
example. On over the weekend, I was at this farm in the Free State, a very good friend of mine, and I had plans. Right, I was going to go to the farm. We were going to do X, Y, Z, and then I was going to leave like the next day. I arrived at the farm. He's nowhere to be found. I said, "Where are you?" "No, I'm in town. I'm coming back just now." "Cool." So I wait for him. I make myself a cup of coffee. He comes back. And I said, "Yeah, okay, cool. Hello. How's it going? What are you doing today?" He says, "Oh, well, today is going to be back to back working. It's the cattle need this, they need that." We did all of that. It's almost late afternoon. I'm like, "Cool. Now I can relax." We dinner's almost served, and then we hear jackal. It's like, "No, we need to go and shoot that jackal because he's going to eat my lambs overnight, and I'm left with nothing." So 3 hours we patrolling for this damn jackal. We see it, we
mm,
chase it. I'm not going to tell you what happened, but I mean, this lifestyle, this day, I did more in a day. I was out, I saw the sun. I was in the fresh air. I was playing with guns. Well, not playing with guns, but like, shooting guns, looking after animals,
and you've got a great
using my
story.
muscles, but like this is like everyday stuff for
Mm.
this guy. There's no day that's the same. It's not just walking around looking, make sure the cattle are fine and check the water, and then you go back home and twiddle your thumbs in
Sit
the
under a
house.
tree and chew on a
You
little stick.
you are never in the house. You never relax. Like I was actually a bit fed up. I'm like, geez, I just want to go relax now because I'm used to it. I want to read my
Yeah,
book. He's like, no, 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 there's work to be done. We need to shoot the
you don't have
jackal, and then
time.
we got this at 10 p.m. We got that and the other. I was like, geez,
Mm,
okay. I mean, it's annoying at the time, but when you think about it, you're like, well, that's such a great life. The kid was on his motorbike, the kid riding his motorbike with his .22 rifle, shooting birds and checking water 5Ks away on the farm. And like,
mm, mm.
it's idyllic. It's really nice. Really enjoyed myself.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I see. 75 square feet says, greetings from another mess of a place, Istanbul. Do you think South Africa would function better as a collection of microstates? I believe coexistence is a bunch of crap that some people profit off of. Roman, I'll leave that to you. There's a topic you talk about extensively on your channel, so you can dive into that one.
Yes, quite. I need to find the video and I'll put it up here. Absolutely. So obviously, it's not going to happen in a political sense. South Africa's not going to break up politically, but de facto, it will, and it already has for the most part. And Oranje is a shining example of this. Oranje is a town that's sort of self-governing. They've got their own currency and very strict rules on how to get there and how to live there and all the rest of it. The Zulu Kingdom's also semi-autonomous to some extent. It has been, bribed by the national government, but in essence, I think South Africa should be at the minimum 4 countries. We go back to the old republics and the 2 colonies. Well, 2 republics, 2 colonies, but I think it should be even smaller than that because the country is just too different from each other in terms of what our sense of justice is, what our sense of history is, what we sense as who we are as people. And I'm fully in line with people identifying through their cultural lens first rather than their sort of national lens. The South African identity means nothing. There's nothing there. Once again, it's a historical fiction. It's an accident of empire by the British. So to truly decolonize, we need to do that away.
South Africa is an empire. It's a horrible one. It's one that's terribly dysfunctional, but an empire nonetheless.
It is an empire, and whoever rules the empire since 1910, it's only 112 years old, well, 100 and whatever it is. The empire is very, very young. There's still time to break it up. There's still time to fully decolonize it, because the republics and the British colonies, maybe not the British colonies, but the republics were a consequence of emergent order. And therefore, to me, they are far more legitimate than the current borders of South Africa, which was a fictitious order set by the British Parliament in 1909 through the South Africa Act. And then the Union came after that. But why are we still following the dictates of a long dead British king who never set foot in this country? The mind boggles sometimes.
Yeah, I see here there was a question here. Oh wait, let me see. Yeah, Carl van Rooyen asks Jippo. Oh, it's a military term for. I think it's in South Africa. It's popular because a lot of guys were on the border. They use the term Jippo means you fix something, but not as you should have. So maybe that's the wrong way to describe it. So let's say, for example, instead of finding like what I did, instead of or let's say, for example, this, instead of getting, let's say there's a part that's broken in your car, instead of buying a new replacement for that part, you build like a fallout version of that part from 2 other parts that have nothing to do with motors, but it works and it does the job. It's not perfect. That's the best definition I have of it.
I think in America, like you MacGyver it, like you sort of use things not for the intended use, but just for the purposes that you wish it to happen.
It's an unorthodox but highly practical solution. That's the best way to. But it is a military term. That's where it comes from. So if you have like a father or a family member that used to be there in the military, they probably use that term. Yeah, dagbreker is a Jippo. There, I fixed it.
It's a G. It's like the Jeff thing. It's Jeff or GIF or whatever. Anyway, it's a good term there.
But yeah, that's what it means. Anyway, so Roman, you've been extolling the virtues of the countryside, but you still live in the city. You go visit the countryside often, but what's keeping you away from actually jumping in the deep end and actually moving to the countryside? The honest question.
Yeah, so a few just sort of personal circumstances for the most part. My wife was specializing in the medical field, and she was writing exams and a variety of other things. She's also very much a city slicker. Like, she doesn't mind the city, which is a bit annoying because I hate it for the most part. But now that she's passed, she's specialized, and now that that has happened, literally in the last 2 weeks, we're actually making plans to get out of, especially Joburg, because this place is just you get all the downsides of country living and none of the upsides.
Mm.
Like,
Mm.
and the downsides of country living, in this sense, like apparently it's dangerous. Joburg, very much so. Apparently, you have to sort of MacGyver things to make things work. Well, welcome to load shedding. What happens every time the power comes back on? You have to go around fixing whatever broke, and yeah, and it's much more dangerous than a farm or any rural area. And unfortunately, if you do decide to protect yourself or defend yourself here, the repercussions are much higher than if you are anywhere else. So we are making plans to go within,
Mm.
hopefully within a year or so.
Mm. All right. Now then, it seems like you will actually get that life in your lifetime. There's a few other questions that I wanted to get to, and I know you have a lot to say about this one, and that is the topic of architecture. When you go to the countryside towns here in South Africa, I mean, you're not going to get the same in the Eastern Cape as you would get, for example, in a small town in the Northern Cape. But at the same time, what strikes you about the architecture when you visit these small towns? What stands out to you?
The fact that they actually have some, which is pretty nice.
Mm,
Which is pretty nice. As I said, in Aberdeen, you got the ostrich baron mansions. You know, something
mm,
that's fallen out of the sky in 1892, whenever the hell it was built, and
right.
it's still the same today. Okay, they added a geyser and modern amenities to it, but it's the very same. And those things are absolutely beautiful. To be a tragedy to demolish them in favor of some skyscraper that no one wants. I actually saw a tweet on Twitter the other day, which I thought was very insightful. It's like, if you want to live, if you want to determine what is a beautiful place to live in, it must have been rich in the 19th century and then became relatively poor in the 20th century. So you build
Mm,
all the nice things in the 19th century, all those beautiful Edwardian and Victorian buildings, or whatever Nachmal houses, as we, for West African flavor. But there's no money to demolish them for modern buildings in the
right.
20th century. And on that front, I mean, South African towns are replete with that sort of stuff. Not none of the big major metros, of course, but as I said, Aberdeen, beautiful. Philippopolis, despite the deterioration of the town, it's you still see the old Nachmal houses. You still see things that existed for 150 years, 200 years. If you go through the Free State, you drive past Paul Rue or Smithfield or De Wetdorp or Zastron or whatever the case might be. Every town has an entrance. Zastron, 1863 or whatever the case might be. And
Right.
inside, unfortunately, it's deteriorating, but there's a sense of history there. It's been there for a long time, and there's still some elements of beauty there. It just needs a bit of care and attention, but you still see architecture, unlike a city.
Mm. Yeah, well, yeah. Kerma GT says, "What, you don't like concrete boxes?" No, well, another interesting thing, Roman. Actually, what I wanted to, and now that we're talking about architecture, what I wanted to touch on is you often tweet about architecture with photographs and hot takes. But someone once responded to one of your tweets with a response that I think is very insightful, and it was I can't remember what your original tweet was, but it was probably lamenting brutalism and someone and the architects that created, because I know you made a video on that on your channel recently. But one of the responses was actually quite profound, and they said it's not just the architect's fault. You have to take it a step back. Who's hiring these architects? It's not like the architects are just dictating what is being built. They get hired to build the cheapest buildings. I mean, it's undeniable that it would be a cost a lot more to build the type of buildings that you see as beautiful. But that's the world that we live in. We live in a cheap world. We live in a world where corporates are just building the cheapest, fastest building. They don't care about how beautiful it looks. Even if a small part of them were to want to build a beautiful building, it's just not possible with the type of costs. And that's talking about people that have that little bit of desire to want a beautiful building. Most corporate types just want a practical building, office space where there's everything that they need for their whatever their business is. They don't really care how it looks. But my one of my uh who was it? I think it was Karel Boshoff actually that made the point that it's not just important for the inside of a house and a building to be beautiful and nice. The outside needs to be beautiful as well, because the outside of the building is the inside of the town or the inside of the city. So when you're walking in the street, you are inside the town, but your walls, quote unquote, are made from the outside of the buildings. So it isn't just about what's inside the buildings. What the outside looks like determines how the people that are walking in the street perceive it and experience it. And if they might not be consciously thinking about it, but their unconscious is picking it up, and it's making them either miserable or happy.
So, just quick to answer your first question, yes, the architects are paid by someone. Yeah, so what? Like, who cares? I think that entire ideology of utility before anything else was derived from architecture. Because as I mentioned in my video, Vitruvius, the famous Roman architect, said a building needs three elements, three characteristics: durability, utility, and beauty. And those all three things was architecture for 2000 years, right? And then in the 1800s, you had some American architect that coined functionalism, or form follows function, where utility is paramount and that's it. And that idea, that ideology of utility at all costs is sort of deeply ingrained into our sort of global capitalist system at hand. So to me, it still remains an ideology. I mean, as an architect, you can sort of be a part of it if you want to. Yes, you're commissioned to do a building and make it efficient and ugly and concrete and glass and whatever the case might be. But so what? It's still part of the overriding ideology of utility at all costs, efficiency at all costs. Damn the people living in this place, damn the people working in this place. And because we damn the people that are working in this space, we're going to pollute the air with air cons and heaters and all sorts of other things to make the place semi-inhabitable, so people like don't throw themselves off the 8th floor every second Tuesday. It's just being part of the system. So if you really care about beauty as an architect, but you sort of take these commissions, you are inherently part of the system. I'm sure there are many other people who would appreciate beauty, but maybe you won't pay as much. It's not a moral, it's not a moral argument here. I'm just saying I don't find the argument as enticing as one might think. And architects did create functionalism at all costs, and that has permeated throughout our culture.
No, that's a good point. I see here, someone just asked here, Feynor asks, how is Urania dealing with load shedding? Do they have their own supply? I actually talked to Joost about it. He gave a detailed answer. If you Google just what is the Urania movement, you'll find my video and my chat with him there. But if I remember correctly, from what I saw from my recent visit, they're building their solar panels now. They are not off the grid completely. It's a massive endeavor. It's much easier said than done. It's not just getting an entire town off the grid is a massive project, and they are doing it slowly. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. But they are very well aware of the need to do so.
I have a solution for them, which comes from Russia. It's called a small modular reactor. So it's a reactor. They normally put it like on a
nuclear reactor in every home. That's the future.
That's right. It is the future. It really is. So it's a tiny nuclear reactor. It produces 300 megawatts of power, and they are sort of powering rural towns across Russia. And how they're doing it, they're putting these reactors on a platform, on a sort of water-based thing, whether it's a sea or a huge lake or whatever the case might be. They plug it into the grid, and it works absolutely wonderfully. It's got a fail-safe. It's very modern. And a lot of what you're finding now is a lot of ships are building these into their systems. So you've got a nuclear reactor on a ship, mostly military for now. But I think in time to come, you've got to have these mini nuclear reactors that are going to just take over the world and be really, really good for ecology, if you really care about that, which I do, but not in the climate change sense, but also for just sustainable energy. Nuclear is obviously the best solution. The best solution. And I think Russia is at is the pioneer in the space where towns can literally procure a nuclear reactor for themselves and use it without maintenance, without worrying too much about the future of energy production. It's really great. And yeah, just research them. They're really good. And I'm going to make a video about them rather soon to solve the ESCOM crisis.
Mm. No, nice. Oh, well, talking about that, that's definitely something that you heard it here first, you'll be able to see on Roman's channel. Before we get to where they can find your content, as we approach the end, I'd like to ask you the question that I've started asking all my guests, and that is, what would you like to leave the audience with? It can be a question, it can be a thought, something to chew on for the rest of the week, something you kind of just leave at the back of their mind. They don't have to think about it now after the show. They can just, something that's somewhere down the line this week, it just comes back to them and it's something that stews a little bit. What would you leave them with?
I'm never good at these things, but one thing, life is a story that you tell yourself for the most part, and that sort of saying, or that inculcation of that idea has really sort of helped me a lot. But number two, South Africa, and just to bastardize it, South Africa is the story you tell yourself. Living in South Africa is the story you tell yourself. A lot of people might think the city's whatever, the country's going down the hole economically, in terms of energy, in terms of race relations, in terms of crime, all those things. I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you, but it's a good thing. It's actually a wonderful thing. We have all the elements of a government that wishes to do evil, but just cannot do it. And that's a very rare and unique opportunity, because in time to come, many other countries will be in this similar predicament. It will take a few hundred years for those countries, but the returns of violence for a nation state is diminishing every single day. In my mind, within 200 to 300 years, states will be sort of a relic of the past. And what we're going to have instead are modern city states. And they're going to get people in there by providing them with as much as possible, because all these people will be dealing in some sort of cryptocurrency. Using that, they will be working on their computers or whatever they have in 200 to 300 years. So in essence, the final thing I wish to say is South Africa could be a pioneer in terms of being able to live in a stateless society using modern technology. And that's a very rare thing. You're not going to find anywhere else. We have the infrastructure for it. The rest of Africa doesn't. We have the people for it, because we're very bright and smart and resilient. And most importantly, we have the government for it, because the government can't do a single thing properly. That's a very rare combination of factors that we should take full advantage of.
No, that's a perfect way, I think, to end it. That's something, a very large bite to chew on for the audience for this week. Roman, thank you very much for coming on. I would just like to give you the final opportunity to show your content. If people like what you were talking about here and they like these types of ideas, where can they find your thoughts online?
Well, Adams, you kindly linked everything below. So if they look at the description, everything is over there. Or just look for Morning Shot, or just type in my name, wherever, and I'm sure you'll find the stuff that I produce.
All right, excellent. And as Roman said, he's going to be keep creating content on a myriad of topics specifically relevant to South Africa. But I think if you're a foreign listener, you might just learn a thing or two as well by using South Africa as your test case study. So before we say goodbye, I would just like to thank the sponsor again of today's episode, Bitvice, which is the only place in South Africa that sells Bitcoin directly to your self-custody, meaning that unlike a traditional crypto exchange, you don't have to trust anyone else to hold your Bitcoin for you. This also removes the largest risk associated with Bitcoin. If you're interested in learning about Bitcoin, check out their podcast, By the Horns. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube. It's very interesting. I tune in there to get my updates on what's going on there with the Bitcoin universe, and there seems to be a lot of talking points recently. So, and they'll definitely be able to help you out there in regards to explaining all the ins and outs of what's going on there. So if you want to, if you just have any questions surrounding Bitcoin, or have actually want to get involved, there's a link in the description. Go check out their website, go check out their YouTube channel and their podcast. They are definitely interesting guys to talk to if you have any questions regarding this topic. And they will also, if you are interested, they can help you buy Bitcoin directly to your hardware wallet in a matter of seconds. So go check out Bitvice. Thank you very much for the kind sponsorship. So Roman, thank you very much. People know where to find you. As you said, all the links are in the description. And lastly, thank you for everyone that tuned in. You had excellent questions and comments. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to a long format conversation. I really appreciate it. And if you're new to this channel, you can subscribe. And if you're not viewing live at the moment, you can still take part in the conversation. Go leave your thoughts or questions in the comment section below. I reply to as many as I can, and I read all of them. So I hope you all have an excellent week and an excellent weekend ahead. And Roman, I hope you also have an excellent evening. God bless and walk well.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye, everyone.
Cheers, guys. Have a good one.